Ah, so much to go over here. I'm trying to get it all in one take. So many takes. I'm going to show you my microtonal instruments, talk about the pros and cons of this technique for this particular mod, why and how you might want to do it or might not want to do it. Let's see, these are pieces of bent wire held on with rubber bands. You move them anywhere you want. They still kind of have to lay straight across the neck. You can't really squiggle them accurately, or at least, I don't know, I haven't tried. But any equal temperament. Any 19-tone, 20-tone, equal dimensions of the octave, even non-octave tunings that involve equal steps like Carlos Alpha or Bolin Pierce. You got so many more options than I know what to do with. That's our biggest pro. It's adjustable. You get to play in so many different tunings. You don't have to shell out $400 for a new guitar for each one that you're vaguely curious about. That in itself just outweighs all the cons for me, because that's so much inspiration. Just being able to play, when you realize that any random collection of notes can be made to sound musical. But also, you know, you're not going to be inspired by every tuning. So not having to pay $400 up front to explore each one, not knowing whether you personally are going to be inspired by it, is nice. Cheap. It's cheaper than even a single permanent fretted microtonal guitar, depending on what you can get your beater guitar for. Your beater guitar, go for one good wood. Doesn't sound like cardboard when you knock on it. Go for one that has a good truss rod, because you can't really negotiate that. I mean, unless it's free. Someone has one that's free, you want to use that. Doesn't matter if it's kind of crap, but that's your main price there. All the supplies you need run you around $100. Yet your main price is your beater guitar. Especially as far as adjustable fret guitars go, no other option except like Tolgahan Kogaloo is like the only luthier that I know of who's still doing adjustable fret guitars. I'm sure he's got a big backlog. I'm sure he isn't cheap. Educational. You learn a little bit about DIY, learn how to set your own nut, learn how to set your own bridge. You're going to learn a lot more about each tuning from, you know, adjusting back and forth between tunings. You learn more about each one, seeing where they sit relative to each other. And, I mean, microtonal, that's on the list because there just aren't that many options for microtonal guitar in general. Like, there just aren't. So let's get into the cons. Playability, you can't wrap your thumb around that. You have to arch your fingers a little more to get around those hooks. So a little more of a jazz, classical posture. Maybe that's a hard turnoff for you if you have a hard habit of wrapping your thumb around the neck. I never did. Still more playable than one of those 24-string surfboard size meme guitars. More playable than a sitar. You can learn to play anything if you set your mind to it. And I have no problems with it. Time, it'll take you, 3 days maybe to do your first one. I knocked out my second one in an easy weekend. Range, you're going to be limited by the heel of your neck. I only got the octave fret on this one by hooking around that peg there, cheating a little bit of extra forward tension. Get a little bit more range than an octave on the electric. It's like a whole step more, but that's non-negotiable really. Buzz action, not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. You're going to have your action a little bit higher in order to avoid the buzz from having your frets a little bit more irregular and a little bit closer together, but not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. And when you sand it, sand a little bit more off of this side to bias it towards slightly higher action. But intonation, I'll get into how to set that, but also not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. It's easy to set, easy to find the tuning, and they don't slide around very much at all. Like the rubber band holds in place very well. I didn't even put tape on this side of this one. On this one, I put tape under that end of the wire and under the butt end of the hooks. Put tape under the butt end of the hooks there. You see a black electrical tape running down under the fretboard. So they're not just sliding back and forth on hard, smooth guitar neck. It keeps them in place very well. So this is ultimately going to be more playable, better tone, better in tune than most guitars throughout history. So just take a moment to be grateful for how available, cheap, playable guitars are. Even if you're going to mess it up slightly doing a DIY mod, you're still going to have a much better instrument than most of the ones your ancestors had. So the tools you need. You want a new nut and bridge. That'll give you less wood to take off to accommodate your fatter frets. You get a new nut and bridge, they're going to be a couple millimeters higher out of the bag, and you won't have to sand nearly as much. Pulling the frets. Okay, now the rest of the tools you need. Sorry. Power sanding, radius block, files, Radius block is the only one of these tools that isn't really going to come in handy outside of this job, but it's less than 20 bucks. It's really essential. 14 is the radius that worked for both of these guitars, and another fretless bass that was done. So 14 is probably your most common. This is 16 gauge wire. That's just what my hardware store had available, just galvanized steel wire. You might could do with a gauge thinner. Electrical tape, needle nose pliers, rubber bands. All told, I think that'll run you about $100. Now, pulling the frets, that's easy. Use a little bit of heat to loosen the glue is what all the videos will tell you. Use a soldering iron or a laundry iron or a curling iron or a knife on the stove to do that. But I didn't actually need to do that on either of these guitars. That fretless bass didn't really need it either. They just don't have that much glue in them. The frets are really more hammered in most cases. So pulling them is easy. Run a knife under this edge and under that edge to kind of separate them from the fretboard, and kind of pry them up with the edge of your knife or the edge of a pair of wire cutters or something like that. Edge of some scissors. Sand it. Sanding it is really easy. Your fretboard is going to come out of a factory pretty level already. Just use that radius block will do the job for you. Add a little more attention to this side than that side to bias your action toward being a little more sloped. Check it with a yardstick maybe to make sure you aren't getting any large bows or humps over the length of the neck as you go. Make sure your truss rod is set straight before you do this, obviously, so that it's not bowed or humped to begin with. And you do want a guitar with a good truss rod, ideally. Making the frets, pretty simple. Work with the curve you've already got. Pull it out as straight as you can, but it's still going to be a little curved. Just let it be. Bend it like it is, and once you put the rubber bands on it, it's going to pull it back down around the radius of your fretboard, and it'll sit flush and match. If you give a little bit too much tension, too much wrap on the rubber band, then the middle will start to bow up a little bit. You get buzzing on your D and G strings. Check for that. Look and see if you see daylight under those frets. If you do, take that guilty fret back off, wrap it one or two fewer times with the rubber band. You'll get a feel for how tight they need to be, how thick your rubber bands need to be. I use like the thinnest of the assorted sizes now. Get like a slightly longer than most, but nice and thin. I find that works really well. Trying to remember anything else I need to go over. You want to make sure you sand the ends of your frets so they aren't sharp anymore. Just a dozen strokes with a sandpaper and they won't tear you up. And keeping it in tune, setting it in tune, very easy, much easier than I expected. You don't need the tuner to tune these frets. Just do it by eye. Make sure they look like an evenly decreasing spacing as they go, and make sure they sit kind of where you'd expect those cent values to be, knowing that the original fret lines are 100 cents apart. See, I used like white wood filler putty to kind of highlight the old fret lines so you can see where each new tuning sits relative to the old 12-veto tuning. I kind of like that. Wood filler putty, another thing I should have brought out here. That's another thing you'll need. Maybe a little bit more than $100 for the tools, but your beater guitar might be as little as free. Get a good one for 60 bucks or a little over $100. But hopefully this technique or any other technique can inspire you to get into the wide world of microtonalism. It's been an unmitigated joy for me. Good luck on your travels.